Hello everyone. Hello. We are here. We're gonna wait about 5 minutes. I was just turned 4 o'clock. Just turned the hour over. Just get people in settled. Did post the agenda what we're gonna talk about in the chat. So take a look at that. Learn it. Study it, or don't. We will be talking about those critique against liberalism and then bullet points that will follow up upon that. So we're gonna wait about 5 minutes after. Then we'll get started. This is a recorded session, but you can find these on YouTube as well as every other week. So if you can't make it next week and the week after, don't worry. They're posted and we can watch them or have them in the background as background noise or whatever. I will be yapping for the entire hour. I will take questions in between as well. If you feel like you need a question, need clarification, type it and then I will read it. If you don't feel like interrupting, raising your hand or whatnot. So if you do have questions, please type them out or just say something, right? Let me know for clarification. So we'll be back in about 4 minutes and then we'll start. Slow crowd. My notes. Shield your eyes. Shield your eyes. My notes. Right here. Okay, open your eyes now. Notes. Here are my notes. Okay, I lied. I'm pretty much all set up. It's been about almost 4 minutes, about 10 seconds. So we're just going to get ahead and start. First things first, end racism. And it's no good. Racism is just a bad thing. But thank you all for being here. Love each and every single one of you. Appreciate your time for being here, even if it's just listening, having me in the background. You are here and all that. That's all that matters. So we did post in the chat the agenda, the critique against liberalism, which will then be followed up about self-defense is violent. And we'll get into that. But it's not malicious. There's no malicious intent when there is self-defense. If anything, it's the opposite. Right. Then we'll dive into dialectical materialism as a mode of thought, as a theoretical framework for our understanding of the shared material condition. And then from material condition, we talk about the restrictions, limitations of what makes the material condition, why it exists as such. And then finally, we'll hopefully get to this ending off with becoming as a material machine process. That's a lot of big words. So don't worry, we'll explain all that. Machine process itself is an entire concept. It is an entire notion and observation, but we will explain that, get all to that. Starting from the top, we will begin now with the critique against liberalism. And this is an entire overarching, an umbrella, the critique against liberalism. There's the different detachments, different sections, but you can talk about liberalism mainly as a freedom ideology. We are free people. As individualism, right? Individual ideology. So liberalism is like this umbrella term for all of this sorts of these notions, individualism, natural liberties, self-liberties, or unalienable rights and such. We attribute liberalism to the Rousseau's, Descartes, Voltaire's, Hobbes, the Enlightenment era period philosophers, right? The 16 to 1800s philosophers, right? That's where we attribute our white European philosophies, where we attribute these liberalisms and natural liberties. So we make a critique against it because it's very prevalent, this liberalism, this mode of thought that is individual rights and liberties, respecting that of other existences, regardless of their, attachments to the material condition. It is respecting beings as beings. Liberalism is not recognizing, a big old authority. It's recognizing people as an entire package themselves, something you can't infringe a right upon. Liberalism. So it's just know that liberalism is entire overarching little umbrella, a lot of terms. Capitalism is deeply rooted inside of liberalism's bosom as a philosophy. So inside of the bosom that is liberalism, capitalism finds well to sit in among its ideology. And as we all know, scratching liberals gives you fascism. Two sides of the same coin, liberalism and fascism. Right, I would say the nice kind is liberalism, and where you finally get that hate and malice, fascism comes out. But it's like a transformation, and where you can understand where one sources from the other. Right, liberalism is just one type of fascism, other way around. Capitalism is like a liberalism going off of liberalism, and they're all interconnected. So just think it just sets a precedent for liberalism, what it is: freedom, self-rights. I can do what I want. I think, therefore I am. It is natural liberties. I'm an individual. Me, myself, and I type shit. So we're going to get right into self-defense is violent, but not malicious, right? So self-defense, and this came from discussions from last week, talking about a violent revolution. Yeah, revolutions are violent. The bourgeois revolution was violent, 1776, and all the bourgeois revolutions thereafter, very, very violent, which caused change. Change comes from violent, but self-defense is violent, but it's not intentionally malicious. When you are defending yourself, it is in a reaction to something. There has to be precedent, or there's set something before you commit to an action of violence yourself, right? It's much different when you're acting on malicious intent before any other actors involved could, foresee or observe the phenomena of you acting. Self-defense is a reaction, but more principally, it is a systemic reaction. It is a strategic reaction. It is something that comes out from the individual upon recognizing certain conditions that allows for this, expression of violence, this action, because action, violence, but self-defense is not violent, or no, it's violent, sorry, but it's not malicious. Malicious intent is where we're getting at, where we're talking about self-defense. Right? When someone's coming at you, right, attacking you either mentally or physically, you're going to defend yourself. You don't want to be hurt. No one likes to get hurt. No one likes to get all of this, bad juju feeling. It's not here. That's why we have self-defense, or the, combating against violence with violence, right? Fire against fire. Many situations where you could use that, but some situations you don't. In this situation, you do. Fire with fire. Violence with violence. In order to deter someone away from committing violence against you, threaten them with violence. It's not malicious, though. You're doing it for yourself. You're keeping yourself safe. And that is the entirety of self-defense. It is safety. And when we're understanding systemic oppression, when it comes to violence, we are being oppressed against and violenced against all the damn time. Every single day, we're so happy. And it may not feel like it, right? No one's pointing a gun to your head. That's not what we, typically think of this like self-defense or this non-violence. But it is through systemic oppression, minimum wage, right? The lack of rising wages and livable wages is oppression. It is violence against the working class, right? Unsuitable living conditions and, incredibly hard, living conditions, rent, can't get, and afford places to live and eat at and have sustenance to the material conditions yourself, right? That is all violence, systemic violence against you. Self-defense in systemic oppression is building community. Self-defense in oppression and systemic oppression is making bonds with your neighbor. It is understanding your material condition. It is no longer wondering why things are the way they are just because they are. They're understanding the material condition. This comes from this, which makes that happen, and that there's a sequence at which this stuff happens. You can trace back the roots of the violence at which you are self-defending against. right? So oppression when it comes to wages, right, where your minimum wage or your non-livable wage, that comes from somewhere. That sort of systemic violence comes from somewhere, and it does stem from this inherent profit motive, like lack for a better term. It is a profit motive that, you know, incurs this violence of systemic oppression that is wages. Now, we don't think, you know, traditionally this violence as low wages as a particular violence, because it is not a particular action. Well, it is. It is an action committed by a particular class. So violence is a broad term, just like liberalism. Self-defense is in a reaction of that. Uh-oh. Lichibita. Is there someone ask them if their audio is on? Can anyone else help me hear me as well? Am I just been yapping for like 10 minutes not saying? Okay. So maybe it's just an audio thing. Okay, maybe it's just an audio thing for them. Maybe someone could type into them, check your audio settings and stuff. Thank you, everyone who can respond to me. But back to it. Self-defense is violence because you are yourself committing to an action which attempts to cause, right, from this point of view, this particular oppression against, which is against another oppression. It's like a equaling out. So let's scroll back up. Self-defense is violent, not malicious. No, we said that, but we have to understand how and why. When we analyze self-defense, there is a reaction to it. Like there's a lot of layers to when it comes to action and oppression inflicted, you know, from yourself, from your body, from your person. And we do this, at least I like to do it through dialectical materialism. So when we talk about dialectical materialism, right, you don't really equate this with self-defense or violence or malicious intent. It's more of a mode of thought. It's a theoretical framework for an individual's understanding of our shared material condition. So, but dialectical materialism helps us understand through the processes of Hegelian dialectics, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which is just your presented argument, contradictions within that argument, your antithesis, and then synthesizing, understanding how these ideas themselves conform and transform into a newer synthesized notion and observation, dialectical materialism. So when we understand self-defense from this theoretical framework and violence, you are first, there is first violence against you. That's what happens. The antithesis or the contradiction, you don't want that violence, right? If someone is committing violence against you, you don't want that. They may want it, but there's two parties involved. And each party has their own representation and voice inside of the, you know, interaction. So there may not be quite the contradiction as stated, right, with the Hegelian dialectics. But when we're understanding the antithesis, there is the anti part of that. There is the something wrong and needs rectification part of that situation. So we have violence against someone. Antithesis, don't want violence. Synthesis, self-defense. There is a process, there is a structure at which we commit to our actions from, which allow us to better understand how our actions affect us and how they materialize in our observation. So dialectical materialism helps us understand this through a theoretical framework, helps us understand that things are the way they are because of a reason, right? We do self-defense for a specific reason, right? Revolution of the working class is no more than self-defense against the oppressive ruling class, the ruling class of which will not, you know, consent to giving us livable wages, work conditions, housing, right? They would rather sell and waste all of their fortunes before giving any one single individual a helping hand, or anyone giving you a handout or anything. You know, the billionaires or the well-off individuals who hold their capital close to themselves rather die with the capital than to help anyone out with, because there's a natural liberty thing. It goes. I'll go back to liberalism in my point of view, in the way I articulate it. It always goes back to liberalism. This me, I can, you know, do this X, Y, and Z. You, however, are different from me, so therefore you can deal with your problems, right? So I would say quite accusatory liberalism. Now, there is, you know, some aspects about liberalism that we can attribute to our modern society, almost all of it. And one of those individualistic aspects is that liberalism is deeply rooted inside of the mode of thought of how individuals think. And it can skew, right, and conflate these terms, self-defense and violence. Well, that's because self-defense is violence, right? But that's different from actually committing yourself to a violent act, right, as malicious intent. You don't maliciously want to, you know, backlash, harm someone to the point of no, there's no return, right? In self-defense. Self-defense is for yourself. You want to get yourself out of the situation to keep yourself safe, right? But there is and comes to a point where your options for safety are to, right, make that ultimatum against the individual who is oppressing you. So there is a lot of nuance to talking about when it comes to violence and self-defense. It's not black and white. If anything, nothing is black and white. Besides, we need to get into like existential philosophy, but nothing is black and white. Everything in the material condition is far removed from the observations and notions of existence. There's a lot of interplay, a lot of interconnected phenomena that occurs when trying to explain the material condition. You have to explain one with the other. Explaining one without the other does nothing for you besides give you a false representation of our shared condition. It doesn't give you the whole story when you don't analyze your world through dialectical materialism in the shared material condition. And the material conditions we do get into, and specifically the restrictions and limitations of the material conditions, of which liberalism does not consider, as it is not a material ideology. See, liberalism is what you call is considered an ideal ideology, since most of the change inside, or most of the tenets inside of liberalism comes from that of self-liberty and self-actualization. This reality built because of how man thinks, similar to how Hegelian dialectics work. Hegelian dialectics, because it was, before of this uttering of dialectical materialism, this Hegelian dialectics is ideal. This ideal notions are rooted and responsible for this individualism. It's this I can do this. I think, therefore I am. A famous quote from Descartes, right? Which transformed in the 16, 15, 16, 1700s, the mode of thought that went from the feudal, monarchical, this king of divine right and power mode of thought to the now quote unquote modernized liberal freedom ideology that everyone gets to experience. There has been a shift in mode of thought that also changed the shift in mode of production that went from feudalism to capitalism. And the mode of thought, I don't know what it's called in feudalism, monarchy praise, monarchy glazing. Or we'll call it monarchy
glazing.
Absolutism. Thank you, comrade. Absolutism all the way next to liberalism. There's a change of mode of thought that went into the change of mode of production, at which we see, right? So it was more than just people doing stuff, right? Committing to bourgeois revolution that people, wanted to see and hold on to capital and stuff. The sophisticated ideas of capital didn't come until much later, but the core concepts of owning property and having man be the individual, right, who owns that and has the power over, he hath mixed his labor with, therefore made it his own property, his own. So when you bake your labor in something, when you make and labor something, it is inherently yours, which is, you can find many loopholes into that, which explains how we got into the situation today, right? You can make many loopholes and, tricks within the, this this ideology that is liberalism to make that which, even though he hath not mixed his labor with, is still his own, because initially there was this mixing of his labor, which then made it his, which then he then scaled up into a multi-billion-dollar business, and therefore he owns everything in that business. There are a lot of hurdles you get from liberalism to corporate billionaire landlords, but they're connected, right? They're one of the same. It takes a lot of explanation to understand how that works, right? Property is in a core tenet against or from that ideology. Property, owning stuff, right? Specifically, man owning stuff. Now, you can make an argument that it wasn't just man, the penis holder, right? I argue that it's man, the being that thinks, right? So it could be any quote unquote man, woman, child, or whatever, of anyone's gender or sexuality right now. But man themselves, the being that thinks, is an argument to be made. But remember where this ideology stemmed from and comes from, right? Liberalism comes from this white Eurocentric ideology in which man becomes into the material conditions by way of his thought. It is very idealistic. It is very, it's very idealistic, unintentional, I would say. There's a lack of strict intention when it comes to liberalism, because liberalism is you do whatever you want. I think, therefore I am. I will make life of whatever I want, and I will do what I want. I'm a free person, liberalism ideology. So we go to the restrictions and limitations of the material conditions because liberalism does not consider this restriction limitations. There are absolute truths to the material conditions, absolute truths of which are recognizable and observable by all individuals who exist, and of course then observe the shared material condition. Everyone goes through this. Everyone understands absolute truths. And I do this almost every week now because I want to make a point. Gravity is one of these points. Oh my God, you see that pen drop? I'll do it again. That is an absolute truth of the material condition. You saw it, I saw it, and you can replicate it yourself. There is a confirmation amongst the individual observers at which constitute absolute truths. Lenin gets into it in some sort of, some book a while ago. It is the compounding relative truth. Hello, comrade. The compounding relative truth. The relative truth compounds into the absolute truth of the shared material condition. So what does that mean? It's whenever I see something and say something, articulate something, it's only relatively true, right? It's true to me. It may not be true for you. It may not be true for your neighbor, for your friend or whoever. When you utter this articulation, this expression about the observed shared condition, this I see something and it's like this, it's only relatively true because I said it from a single perspective. The compounding of the relative truth means when more people adopt this, right, understanding of the shared condition, therefore it then solidifies, not entirely, but becomes close to an absolute truth, right? So it's when you're shown a phenomena and that phenomena is apparent and the person articulates it and comes up and crafts an explanation for how that phenomena exists, you're gonna believe that. You're gonna be like, yes, that's correct, sir. That's fantastic. Or yes, correct, ma'am. That is absolutely correct. So when we drop the pen and show off gravity's impressive phenomena, it happens every single time without fail. I would freak out if I held this and it didn't fall, because then I'd be breaking physics and then I would probably break down and not know what reality is. But luckily, that's not what happens. This is what keeps us grounded to the material condition, that things occur with particular restrictions and limitations, right? On our scale as little wee human beings, but still big enough to conform to, general relativity physics, we find life to be fairly consistent. Consistency in this world is top notch, right? You can go out every single day and expect the sun to be there at a certain time of day. That's a truth. That's an absolute truth. The sun will always be there. You can find comfort in that, right? Gravity will always drop the pen when I drop it. You can always believe that. That is something. Oh, you don't want to get into that discussion. What is reality? I love that question. I love this. Existential philosophy is my forte. What do you call it? My special skill. So we could probably get into that a little after. But when we're talking about the restrictions, limitations of the material condition, there's the big old phrase right here. It is that gravity acts like this as such. And if you want to get a little more specific, our restrictions, limitations of the material condition are confined to this planet thing, this Earth thing, and where gravity is 9.81 meters per second, and where light travels in the atmosphere at this particular speeds and interacts with our molecules in the air at this particular way, right? In this particular set of, and I would say the rearrangement of this particular material condition shared explains well how we get to live from the air we breathe in this space as a fluid, because air is a type of fluid, into our lungs to nurture the experience of life, to make it so, and for us to continue living life as well. You see the restrictions and limitations of our shared condition. So these limitations make bounds within our shared condition. These bounds are definable, right? That's just how we can use and measure with numbers how our existence blends into the fold of reality. How our observations, right, are no more than just descriptions of absolute truths of the material condition. I'll say gravity, water. I was going to say hydroponics. Same thing, hydroponics. Hydraulics as well, the physics of water and the physics of liquids and stuff. There's consistencies in the material condition, and that is the restrictions, limitations of the material condition. There are bounds. So when I drop something, it falls. When I drink water, I live. When I don't get my burger, I get a little sad. It's just things happen in these world. It just happens, right? But it not just doesn't happen because it does. It happens because of a particular reason, and that reason, that discovering and uncovering of that reason and that being, is what helps us understand the material conditions better. Is just why I like to advocate dialectical materialism. There is an extraction of knowledge when it comes to understanding our conditions through the study of objects, right? So tweak the pen. I won't drop it this time. Won't be mean. This goes into the machine process, and I yapped a little bit too fast, so we're going to talk a little bit more about everything. So this is the machine process and the becoming of the machine process inside of the restrictions, limitations of the material condition. So take a look at this pen right here, right? There's the black casing around it, this blue collar, this little rubber piece right here, and then the clicky part. There's a spring inside here with ink. There's a lot of components that make this pen, but not every single component came from the same position on the earth, right? This plastic probably came from one part of the earth. This rubber came from another part of the earth. This ink inside, right, came from another part of the earth. And all of this goes into what's called a machine process, or the process at which aligns in a particular sequence. And this sequence allows us to derive meaning, because meaning is derived from relationships, and the machine process is nothing more than just a bunch of working relationships. So the working relationship between the molding of this plastic, to the fitment of this rubber, to the placement of the spring, to the letting out of the ink as I write, to the ballpoint pen on the very end. There's a lot of things that go into make the pen, and the best part is you did not need to know any of this to use the pen. You did not need to know how this pen was made, or any pen or any object for that matter, to understand how it works, or to understand what it does for you to be able to use it, right? You don't need to know that the spring tension in this pen is a particular weight in order for you to click it with ease and have it stay up like this with the mechanic, inside to hold. You don't even know all of that, but that is what occurs and what happens every single day in life, right? Things come together into the machine process, this definite sequence to mold and come form together, raw materials with labor. Right. And just a little side note, raw labor, raw materials is not just wood, coal, and, raw ore and iron and steel. Raw labor is plus labor is just whatever materials used to rearrange the materials, the conditions to make it so. And so the plastic was considered a raw material in which the labor conformed it into a cylinder-ish type. The raw material of rubber, probably was heated or melted and then shaped into what it is now through hand of labor. The clicky part, this pen and stuff, the ink inside. There's a lot of these machine processes that occur everywhere in the world, and that's just a pen, right? On to more complicated notions about our shared condition. Talk about society, which is an entire huge step. There's so many steps in between pen and society when it comes to machine processes, because there's a lot of processes, working relationships that makes a society form and function, right? Because the pen exists as such, and we are able to create the pen as such in the shape and form and way it is, it's very easy to explain its existence. Society, that's a little bit more complicated of a topic. Talk about machine process, because you can jump into any topic and then you could root it back to society through the machine process. And I like to make the example: oil rig, trucking industry, stores, streamer. There's a lot of through those everywhere. There doesn't seem like there's much connected there. Here's how it goes: you extract the oil from the earth, right? This is what helps the trucks run to move the food to grocery stores for the streamer to get food. Now, if the oil industry went down, right, at this vast infrastructure stage of our society, probably won't be that affected, the streamer. But let's say majority of the oil industry shuts down. Trucks won't be able to run, food won't be able to get delivered, and the streamer will just not be happy unless they DoorDash everything, which they probably do. But that is the essence of a basic machine process. It's one industry affects another, even though that industry has nothing to do, quote unquote, with that other industry. So oil and trucking, or oil and automotive and commercial transport. Now, those are kind of inextricably connected. But we go to automotive transport or transportation, commercial transport, and then retail and grocery chains. Now you get into starting to look at little industries that are a little different, something that seems quite inherently separate, but understanding how they fit into the machine process of society, very much connected. Now we go on to the grocery store and the streamer, or the person who stays at home or games or whatever. But just let's say, imagine another person, an occupation who does stuff online, right? An online occupation goes to the store or does whatever, relies on this store thing to gain and have their sustenance of their material condition, their food, their snacks, their water, their drinks, or whatever the individual wants to get at this store thing, was made possible by the commercial transport industry, this trucking, right, for where people can transport goods across, let's say in America, the whole nation. But then the trucking industry wouldn't be here if it weren't for the oil industry that were, lubricating the engines or having a part in the lubrication of the entire, system. that allows for the truck to move and transport. So the machine process in society, and that was just one section, right? And we can go into like sewing, garment, fashion. There's a whole industries, but the machine process of society is entire complex, apparatus for our understanding. So, but we go from the pen, right, and where all of this stuff comes together to make the experience possible, so does society. In our little example of oil, trucks, grocery stores, and online occupation, that little streamer person, all of them come together to provide value for society. What value does the oil industry provide? Well, it benefits the trucking industry, the transport industry. So what does the transport industry provide? Transportation of goods. Well, that's obviously a good thing. You want goods to be transported from one place to another. And so in this example, we would use grocery stores, right? Fruits, snacks, chips, steak, beef or whatever, lentils, beans, whatever it may be. And then so the individual of society who is just living there is like, I want food. Now, this individual isn't going to go and hunt a boar, right? Or isn't going to go out and try and, what's uncivilized? Stealing? No, I like the boar example. They're not going to hunt or grow their own food like a farm. No, they're going to use this little thing, this little exchange, call it money, in order to go to the store to get food, to get their sustenance, to get their stuff. But that's all that the individual understands about this entire process. From the individual born, at least in the modern time, right, in these developed quote unquote countries, but in these societies, an individual born understands how to get food, not by hunting, but by going to the store and getting food. That is the place and source of our sustenance. One, because most of the time we weren't taught how to live off the land and hunt. I think that's intentional. That's very intentional. They did it on purpose. They don't want us living us on our own. But two, it incorporates into a larger process that is society that helps maintain everyone. So if people think that they don't owe anyone anything, they don't live in a society, apparently. I don't know. That's just my hot takes, my little opinion, because everyone is reliant on everyone in this society. There does exist a major exploitation in this system, but we're still reliant on each other. Even the billionaires are the most reliant on us, the working class, right? The reliance. Society is about reliance. And the best way to nurture reliance is through community, because then you start building trust. When you build reliance off of exploitation, that's how revolutions start. That's how uprisings start. That's how you get people pissed off, right? Reliance based off exploitation. But we're here to build reliance off of trust and community building and helping us understand, at least for my part, education, the material conditions shared. Get your brain working, your thoughts, your gears turning. Question why you are here. Why am I here? And then talk to yourself a little bit. Yeah, I'm here because of XYZ, and then move on to your day. It is important to understand your shared condition. It is important to understand how things are the way they are, because most of the time we look at the world already complete and the processes at which it became into the finalized product we get to observe upon, and then I like to say throw. And this throw nature is that you've never seen this pen before until now I've shown you, right? And if I never talked about this or quote it, but now we're talking about it. It is no longer, I've thrown it at you, quite literally thrown. I threw it at you in your perception, helped you understand what this is, how it exists, what it means in relation to our conversation, in relation to us, maybe a relationship to you. And then now it exists as an object in your perception. Probably never see that again after this, but now that you know that it exists, it no longer has this thrown nature to it. You know a little bit about it. And this concept of throw goes well deep into the machine process, because you are thrown understanding. Oil industry, it works like that. Trucking industry, and then that works in a relationship and then grocery stores. These things may on the surface on throw may not, come to us as a relationship articulable, like may not be something as easily recognizable, but through our dialectical materialism, through our analysis of the material condition, we can understand how these things relate. And so does everything. A lot of things relate to each other. I would say everything relates to each other, because on the most fundamental basis, and this is an existential philosophy, we exist. Period. That just exists. The pen exists. This mouse exists. This Sharpie exists. My phone exists, but we denote particular existences to the capacities of which they are able to, for lack of a better description, express themselves as a sort of autonomy. Now, there's a lot of steps removed from existing and being autonomous and being, but that's generally how we separate these existences, right? From quote unquote objects to people. Hello. That is how we, define our existences. But to the most fundamental level, things exist. They are here. When it comes to existence, this mug with my lemonade, no more existing and hanging out and chilling. than this guy right here talking and yapping to a screen in a bunch of people's ears. Thank you very much. But there is a lot of this existing around here. And we denote these particular existences as what, fundamentally is not us, right? I am not the phone that keeps going off in my corner of my eye. I am not this mug. And we are able to describe these existences, describe these objects in our existence, right? And these become a part of the machine process of society. Now, that mug, right, believe it or not, comes from the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and I went last year. Ooh, nice fun time learning about the fish and stuff. But I can tell you a little bit of history about where this mug comes from, and now you're able to better understand and articulate at least this portion of the the class about this articulation or whatever. But you do this everywhere, right? So it may not be that mug. It could be your mug. It could be your china, your plateware and such. And it could also be maybe your car. It could be the object that you are familiar with in your existence, right? They exist. They are here. Fundamentally, we exist no different than anyone else who exists, but this is where we get a little separated from the material condition. It is a self-actualization. Now, I'm not going to blame entirely liberalism on this, notion. There has been times before liberalism where this observation has been made apparent, this individualism, this, the separation of existences from this versus that, right? But what I'm trying to get at is the machine process includes all of these existences, even trash, even quote unquote trash is an integral part of society. Because what isn't here is somewhere else, right? Our trash doesn't just go away. When you throw stuff in the trash can, it doesn't just go away. We can talk about the trashing industry too, right? The person who wakes up to go, do the truck driving for the trash compactor goes to each neighborhood, right? To which your trash then ends up in a land dump, to which the same driver dumps that load in that dump, to which that individual then goes back to the to their dwelling or wherever, the home. They hang out, and then the next week they come back to the same house, maybe your house, to take that trash at which you dumped, at which they can take it and then they can dump themselves. There's a lot of interplay relationships that are not strictly connected but much serviceable to the community at large, right? You don't need to know the name of your dump truck driver, right? Your trash delivery guy, your trash undelivery guy. You don't need to know their name in order for you to get your trash, out of your way, out of your house. Like, get this out of here. That is a social service. There are a lot of social services that are relying on each other. So you don't need to know the name of your trash to get your trash. You don't need to know how this pen works or is built and constructed to use it. You don't need to know how I exist and be here for you to listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth. Anyone get that? But we exist here in this machine process that is society. We're all connected, right? The person who does business and finance has no connection to the farmers in California who are just picking for way less than minimum wage, poverty wage. But they're still living in the same society. They're still living in the same, this little bubble, this sphere, which affects everyone, right? Because maybe that business person, doesn't care about, all this logistics labors and stuff. It's a really bad person overall, just to care about community and whatever. But you have the farmer who is out here picking and stuff and the strawberries and all the fruits and stuff. Maybe that one businessman across the entire country in New York has had those strawberries, those fruits that were picked by the hands of the laborer all the way in California. That's how connected we are as a society. As a society, we're connected very much so, and where you can get fruit hand-picked from an individual who makes dirt to fucking nothing as a living for their labor, to an individual who goes to the store because of the shipping logistics, because of the trucking industry and oil industry, to go to the store to get the fruits nice packaged, which were hand-picked and labored from an individual in California all the way in New York, and they still get to live a nice life in the society. It's crazy how we're all connected, but we never pay mind or attention to it. And this is no fault to anyone. No one is taught to believe and understand this perspective of the material condition. We understand and how and have all of our things and haves and have-nots because of our external shared material condition. So, a question: do you think that our discussion should be framed in opposition of liberalism, or as how communism an extension of liberalism enlightenment? Hold on, I'm going to read that again. Do you think that our discussion should be framed in opposition of liberalism? I'm an op to liberals, or as how communism is an extension of liberalism enlightenment? Now, I'm not sure I understand your question. You're trying to equate communism with liberalism because they are on the polar opposite sides of the political spectrum, understanding how political thought develops. Because communism is fundamentally anti-capitalist, liberalism is capitalist. So communism as an extension of liberalism could be construed, maybe, but communism is anti-capitalist, meaning that there is a air of demolishing the privatized mode of production, where liberalism is the maintenance of that privatized mode of production, and where liberalism maintains and seeks the maintenance of capital, the dynamics of capital, the dynamics of individual freedoms and liberties to own and have capital in such the ways that it does affect our shared condition. Liberalism is counter-revolutionary. So yeah, opposition. So we all go back to liberalism as a material machine process, because the entirety of our discussion is about the material condition, of which liberalism is not. Right. So the machine process would tell you, from a liberal point of view, is that people are doing that stuff because they want to, and they want to fulfill themselves in most of the way. So the oil people on the oil rig are doing it for themselves. They're not doing it for anyone else. And then the products and fruits of their labor just so happen to go to the trucking industry, and where the trucking industry just takes this as need to do and conduct business, and where they only do the trucking for themselves, and where, they are able to express themselves as such. So the truckers do that for their purpose, and then they go and deliver for their sustenance to a grocery store. To liberalism is not just only counter-revolutionary, but counter-materialism, right? Material machine process, liberalism wouldn't be able to articulate a part of, like, a portion of the machine process. People tell you that people live individually, people live as this self-liberty, and people do what they want. People have the freedom to do whatever they want. And so they are detached and separated from everyone else. We are very much connected to everyone, and building community helps nurtures those relationships. Being individualistic only harms, right, people, right? Branding yourself as an incredible individualist is like having, capitalism praise you. You're gonna have capitalism praise you. Wow, good job on you for being very individual. They got good job for you for being a hallmark for what is it? Nuclear family, the white picket fence, this U.S. hegemonic thought, this overall individualism, this great liberalism. So back to it, the material machine process. I think we're gonna go work our way back. How fun is that? So we're about halfway ish, a little over half. So we're gonna go back from the material machine process, of which exists within the restrictions, limitations of the material condition. Things happen in a particular way, right? Watch, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna think, damn, it didn't come true, it didn't work. You don't know what I thought, and you're never gonna find out what I thought. But the fact that it didn't happen just proves to me, and it should prove to you as well, that your thought does not change the material condition, right? I'm going to make the sound at which I dropped the pen in my head there. You didn't hear it, but I did. Now let's try this. You did hear that, because that did happen, because I did express and invest myself to a process that did materialize that sound, which you were able to observe it and hear it. That is the restriction, limitations of the material condition. Right here, immaterial condition, this is not indicative of a material standpoint of substance. This thought thing right here only helps me express as a tool for expression. It is not the tool of oppression itself. It's a tool of expression, this thought thing. So we go from the restrictions, limitations of the material conditions, right? Things happen in a particular way. You notice how that pen made that sound every single time? It's very consistent. It's very good. It's a very, it's a very reliable thing to, help us, understand why things happen. So I'll do it again. Oh, the same exact sound, very consistency. You love to see it happen, but that all is confined within the borders of the material condition. So it makes that sound because of how the physics, work in our shared condition, how all of our structures in our, buildings and society were built because of the restrictions of the material condition. You don't just build buildings hella tall without any structural support. You don't build buildings hella wide, There are certain ways to do stuff in the material condition. And if you don't do it that way, then your expressions of the ideal thought don't generally materialize as such, right? There's a fine line between motivation and like conviction to like delusion and just being, a delusional girl. There are restrictions, limitations where things happen, yes, but things must happen not in a particular way because it is, but a particular way because if it isn't, or because if we did it that way, if we didn't do it that way, it wouldn't materialize at all. Right. So when we go about in conducting a revolution, there are many things we need to be worried about, not to regress back into counter-revolutionary ideas and thoughts. And we could talk about classes and classes upon it, but it's best when we actually practice it and invest and express ourselves so that we can gain that experience from that perspective, that point of view. And getting the experience and learning these limitations of the material condition, just go out explore and play with the world, understand how it works. Because we're just here. I was telling we're just people doing stuff, right? I tell you, a few years ago, I was in a corporate job. That shit sucked. I fucking hated it. That was not fun. It did pay the bills though, but the bills weren't enough to keep myself, mentally sane and happy, physically fit and all that. It destroyed everything about me but my wallet. So what did I do as an intern? I destroyed my wallet and then saved everything else. Quite honestly, best decision of my life. I don't recommend it for everyone. It's not for everyone, but it is a good step forward in helping gaining your humanity back. So, but the restrictions, limitations of the material condition, liberals do not consider it because it is what is thought that man's thought changes the material conditions. It is man's way of thinking and the way he does that. But there is a little parentheses, right? I think, therefore I am. There's a parentheses after I think, then I do, therefore I am. Right? This doing process is either inherent or just completely overlooked and overshadowed, which that doing part helps us explain those limitations of the material conditions, like why gravity works at a certain speed, why light travels at a certain speed, right? How our functions and relationships materialize and occur in our communities, right? How this stuff happens. When I say there's absolute truths to the material conditions, there is going to be certain phenomena that occur every single damn time. Understanding through dialectical materialism helps you understand these. And the best part is about dialectical materialism, just like everything else, you don't have to know what it is to understand how it works. Check this out. You think a caveman knew calculus, A, B, or, pre-cal or whatever, like advanced trigonometry, to know how far to throw a spear to hit an animal in the head or to get it? I don't think so. That caveman did not know a single thing, not even about numbers. We probably had a rudimentary counting system, but no like sophisticated numbers, calculus and such, to know the parabolic curves of the spear at which he threw. No, did not need to know any of that to know how to get this spear into the body of that boar or that animal so that I can eat or that person can eat, right? So that they can stay living, stay here, stay up, stay game, So the best thing about dialectical materialism, don't need to know how it works or don't need to know what it is to know how it works, right? People do it all the time, but there's no name for it. So, and there's no label. So therefore there's no attribution to it. And so therefore it gets developed sporadically. There is no attribution to it. So therefore there's no direction principle to the understanding of how this works. So you passively develop this, right? Some people it comes naturally, some people it doesn't. But when you are aware of its existence, when I utter dialectical materialism, you should have these images and pops or these descriptions pop of what it is, how you're able to utilize it as a theoretical framework of your, mode of thought for the material condition. How we exist in it, right, is one thing. How we perceive and understand it is another. But how we perceive and understand it helps us, materialize our expressions in which in the shared condition we all observe. Right? Because this right here, this forehead, these eyes, these glasses, this mouth, the voice, all of my hand gestures, I love talking with my hands, are all no more than filters or tools for my expression as an individual. Right? And those filters, right, come out in a certain way. And they force the expression that I desire to make come out in a certain way. And it is the combination of my internal expressions, my articulations, and the material phenomena which you observe compacted, combined together as a single, right, delivered object, the delivered phenomena, in which you get to experience it in its entirety. What's going on up here, it's a slightly different than what actually comes out. Right? Because through the restrictions, limitations of my body, I'm not able to express all this much. I have like pages and pages and books worth of notes because these are much faster than this. So yeah, I write a little bit, but no, it's not about me. It's just understanding that people do a lot of stuff. Doesn't mean people know, have to know what it is, how it is and such. But when people do it, people understand it. And it's the beautiful thing about committing to actions is when you do it, you understand it. And if you do it and you don't understand it, it leaves you more opportunity to go ahead and do it again because we have time. But dialectical materialism is one of those things where you don't have to know what it is to know how it works, because we do it all the time. We see something wrong with it, and then we're like, it could be better. It could just be a little bit better. And that is basically the essence, very elementary, of dialectical materialism. See something wrong, and then going out and be like, yeah, let's go and fix that. We can fix that. That in essence is it's a scientific method, because dialectics is a scientific method. It is like a hypothesis. It is if then statements. If I do this, then this happens. But dialectical materialism goes under strict analysis. So there is no ifs, there is only whens. right? So when we do this, this will happen because we analyze our arguments against the shared material condition, of which houses restrictions, limitations that are consistent. And it are these consistent variables that allow us to form our understanding of the conditions. But you don't need to understand any of that to know when something's wrong, you can fix it and then synthesize it, fix it into what it could be. So dialectical materialism, don't need to know any of that to a theoretical level, right? A majority of people don't need to understand theory to know how it works, right? I just get into theory because I'm a big old nerd, apparently. But no one needs to read a bunch of books, right? I don't wish anyone, because I used to be someone who didn't like to read books. Now I kind of do lightweight. But no one needs to go and read every single book about theory. No one gives to be every single thing about everything. Reading is great, but if it's not for you and if you can't sit down and do it, right? Explore different avenues at which you can get that information. There are audiobooks, there are video essays, there are other people who are willing to explain it to you in such ways that help you understand it, right? Reading books, getting it straight from the source material, it's pretty good. I would say it's like number one, like a top three, like avenues and sources, but work what's best for you, right? Don't try and conform yourself to a condition when the conditions can, conform to you. In this sense, right? If you're reading books versus audiobooks and such, whatever helps you digest and get all that information, you should do that. And then we're talking about, back to self-defense and violence. So dialectical materialism helps us understand an analytical framework, right? So when we analyze this word self-defense and then violence and then malicious, we understand this through a particular relationship, right? A relationship from self-defense derives from a violent act against another not so violent act in this sense. Like self-defense is just you are standing there, someone comes up to you because of the way you exist, your background, your people's place, your face or whatever. There is a violence committed against you, right? Whether it be systemic oppression through wages or whether it be actual violence at gunpoint, right? Or at knife point or whatever. Self-defense is this necessary reaction to keep yourself safe. Because as much as they can do whatever they want as their freedom individual, you can too, you do as well, your freedom individual, right? To keep yourself safe. If someone is harming or threatening your safety, that is grounds for self-defense, right? So, but all in, within reason. And that is why I love talking with you people who are so smart and intelligent, because we can reason, because we can understand these limitations to our expressions of violence as well, right? It's not for an eye for an eye. It's more so about getting yourself to safety before any harm can be done. So it's not like running away. It's running away from not dying or from not being harmed, because you don't want to get harmed, right? Self-defense. But it is violent because you need to be able to defend yourself. If you're to defend yourself with reason, that'd be great, because I don't like picking a fight. I don't like fighting. But if I were to, I'd have to. But I usually do prefer words over, and reason over fists and, swinging, The self-defense is violence. If someone's committing violence against you, right, fire against fire, if they swing, right, you don't have to swing back, just don't get hurt. And if you do get hurt, swing back, maybe it'll turn or whatever. There's a lot of classes that go over this, but as from an ideological standpoint, self-defense is violence, right? And a violent revolution is self-defense against a system that doesn't care about you, right? Why would you show a system any respect if that system has no respect for you? Right? It will never catch me respecting the system of capital. It is not a legitimate system. There is no legitimate system inside of capitalism because it is found on exploitation. Simple as that, right? I'll question the hell out of authority when it comes from a oppressive standpoint, aka liberalism founds its capitalist oppression. So therefore, I will look towards liberalism as a mode of thought, as a philosophy that helps me understand why this is an illegitimate. It's kind of ironic, right? Liberalism is supposed to be this, most legitimized system of being in a state for humanity, but then the mode of production coming from that mode of thought is anything but. It's kind of ironic. It's kind of funny as well. It's very silly. But this is not malicious, this self-defense. You're trying to get yourself to safety. That's like a number one thought. Get yourself to safety. Get people safe. Self-defense is about safety, right? Self-defense is violence because it's about safety, right? People committing violence against you, they're not thinking about your safety. They're thinking about theirs. Right, very, very selfish people think about their safety in terms at which express violence outwards to ensure that safety. When you do that, that self-defense is violence, but for safety, you're on the right track. You're on that understanding that I need to protect myself, right? Take up arms against the system that will not hesitate to I was going to say something violent, but I guess I'm not. But just know that self-defense is violence, right? It's not malicious. Violence itself from an actor can be malicious, right? Intentional or not intentional or whatever. But there is an oppressive force against you, and you don't want to have that harm placed upon you. You're going to defend yourself, keep yourself safe. That's number one. Keep yourself safe. Safety. We advocate for safety around here, right? We're not advocating for big, giant, violent revolution. We're advocating for being safe out there while committing a revolution, right? Understanding your education in arms, understanding your education in political thought, understanding your education and understanding how we exist, right, with this violence in the mode of production. With this violence, we exist. Self-defense is not violence. In order to violate someone violate you, well, I love evolving seeds. Let's see. Violence. It's a very philosophical question, this violence thing, because we understand this through a particular reason. Evolving seeds has a complete justifiable base of violence is not, or self-defense is not violence, because there is reason backing up against it. I'll always support that argument. But when we talk about violence here, it's this reaction of violence against yourself, right? When you self-defense and whack or running away, right? Okay, self-defense when you're running away, in that sense, of course, not violence. When you're running away, you're defending yourself as in fleeing, not violence. But when you are faced with an attacker and you go ahead and attack yourself, that is self-defense. That is violence, because you are committing yourself a violence. But traditionally, I can see, of course, that is not violence. You are self-defense. So there are many arguments to be made about it. You definitely see two sides of the same coin when it comes to this violent self-defense, because it is a nuanced topic that we could talk about for days and ends on that. That's what political thought is so wondrous. It's breeding grounds for yapping sessions, in my opinion. So when you talk about self-defense and this such, it's always a certain context at which you refer to this, because there is no absolute truth when it comes to self-defense. So there's absolute truth in the material condition, but self-defense as a notion is far removed from the existences of absolute truth, because self-defense has quite the interplay and these internal contradictions which exist within it that could never make it an absolute truth, right? There's nothing you could say about self-defense as one thing, right? There's no one thing that can describe this one phenomena, because self-defense requires interplay of particular phenomena, which makes it a thing, because self-defense is a reaction, so therefore it is context-based, right? So self-defense could be non-violent in context, right? Self-defense could be violent in context. There is a lot of context to understand and discover. There's a lot of talking and such and yapping or whatever to reach the conclusions that we do. So whether violations of someone being violated or not, these interplays of the words, right? As long as we understand each other, right? That's why I love getting into political conversations. They help us understand each other. But the best part about organizing and building community is that these principles are baked within the actions that you do. We don't need to be having these 2-hour long conversations, right, about one particular phenomena, when we can go out and just have our fun and have our actions show our intent and such. So it's passionate, violent. Force is not, it's force, but not violent. Yeah, it's not violent. Yeah, it's a force. I'll agree with you. Yeah, it's not a force. Opposed. So yeah, violence does carry some incredible connotation to it. So, but for the context of this, I used violence, right? Because violence itself is it's an intentional force intentional to a particular, degree. But I do see that it is almost at that 5 o'clock, and we did wrap it back around. So this has been a light critique against liberalism, and understanding that there is no material basis for liberalism. The material basis for liberalism goes as far as man that thinks, and everything after that is just complete pure conjecture. There is no material basis for the understanding of how people be beyond what man thinks, and how that freedom, right, incorporates into that process, and how individual rights unalienable because men exist and men be. Everything after that, the organization of the people for a state, the organization of production for labor, and all that's left to the whims of the people who exist as free individuals, free thinking people. That's what I'm talking about. So it is that 5 o'clock ish for my time, 8 o'clock for some people. So I will be here. Type in more questions. I will gladly answer them. We would talk about it. Speak, and you can ask your questions aloud. I will be here 5-10 ish, 5-10 minutes after. But if you need to go, get out of here. So Thank you. These will be uploaded to YouTube Friday ish, noon my time. So, well, if you're here, you're here. And if you're not here, you don't get the message. So I'll be now reading the chat. But if you do have questions, type them out, ask me. We'll talk about it. I'll be here for 5-10 minutes after. Thanks, comrades. Love you all proud of the people. Love you all.
I just wanted to say that I don't be playing like a semantics game or anything like that. The reason why I specify that self defense is not violence is because that's how the system deters people from doing anything against it because they deem it quickly as violence. Protesting, stopping traffic is violence. And it gets real subjective real fast, like you're saying. But the idea that, for clarity's sake, in order for violence to occur, somebody has to be violated, which is the entire reason the word is violence. It's an extension of the word violate. So the reaction to a violation can't be a violation if you're the victim of the original violation, because that's not even how physics works. It has to be an equal and opposite reaction. The opposite reaction to violence is defense, self-defense in this case, or social defense in a larger scale, such as like the Black Panthers, etc. But I make that distinction because the powers that be work extra hard to make sure that deep in people's conscious and subconscious minds, they equate the actions they would take against the state to put down the state's oppression, tyranny, and harm as violence, which subconsciously and consciously enforces them not to engage in that behavior, because no rational person wants to just engage in violence or do violence. So, but they would self defense. So it is a psychological landmine that discourages would be activists who are down and actually willing to put their ass on the line from doing so, because they, in their mind, don't equate those actions as self defense or social defense. They equate them as violence.
Well, okay, like the difference to me is more the fact that or the reason why to me it's not as important to distinguish self-defense from violence is because I don't inherently believe that violence is something we need to view as bad. Like violence is something that just kind of happens. It's not something we should idealistically want, but in certain contexts, yeah, like you're saying, violence is the only means by which we are allowed to attempt some form of self-defense or attempt some form of maintaining things for people. So to me it's also that it doesn't we don't need to separate violence out as being something that is not morally applicable to us, or something that's not considered applicable in that context, because I think that violence is something that is very we need to be very rational if we are having to use violence. We need to be very intentional with how we are going to use people and have people functionally be resources. So we need to, with clarity, recognize what exactly it is we are doing and be clear that we are asking people, or that people are being put into a specific context that certain acts are required. Because, again, to me, violence isn't a thing. The way that it is being framed, or that y'all are talking about it, is just worrisome to me, because that's the kind of thing that you can very easily start to say, I am now separating violence that I am doing from the violence that others are doing, so that certain people may undisciplinedly apply this to mean any form of thing that I interpret as violent would then necessitate me to respond with self-defense that I do not recognize as potentially being violent, or not considering that something extremely violent is violent. So that's just more my question, or my point with that, of there isn't a need to separate out self-defense and violence if that is what is going on.
Yeah, I think practical or serviceable to our conversation, we could make that distinction. But like practically, when we're out organizing, violence and such, it all comes from the same force, and but it's recognizable to the actual, the oppression that comes from it, where we equate that violence from. But yeah, violence is just a force. There is something that intentional, that violence occurs and that it does and denotes that particular experience, that particular phenomena. So in this conversation of violence and self-defense, it is the clarity and especially the under umbrella of liberalism. Is where we're making our point here to help us understand. But the best thing is, and I keep saying, is that you don't need to understand all this to know how it works. We're all very, educated individuals. We understand. That's why we're able to have these conversations and such. So that we can go back and banter, bicker, and back and forth. It only helps us develop further our understandings of our conversation. So, loving the conversation, I did see some questions. Violence is destructive. So the question would be, yes. Smash the state. What is it? You read a lot of theory. Smash the state to bits, especially the bourgeois state. Smash the bourgeois state to bits. Be destructive. Not leave any trace of it for it to reproduce, because we are here to reproduce, not individualistic state. We're here to build a decentralized community, which helps serviceable at large, not to a particular private interest. So violence, destructive in the context, smash the state, smash it to bits, not leave any recognizable trace of it. Opinion on civil society. It lives under, no, almost got me. Hold on. Civil society versus political state. I think those two are conjunction. Right, you can have a civil society and a political state, but a civil society can exist without a political state, right? So you can have a civil society where people just do stuff, but you don't have to have a state, right? So when you have a civil society where people just do stuff, in a social contract in our civil society, people subscribe to and therefore express and then be out and have as such. But then in a political state is where civil society is a particular mannered. It's mannered in a particular way. The expressions are divided or are categorized in particular phenomena, expressions that allow for the individual to exist. So like social norms, right, come from your political state. A civil society could have your social norms, but a political state enforces does so absolutely, right? We call those laws. We call those the legislation, and then the this legislature. You have all of these these contracts in which you subscribe to from the moment you were born, your citizenship and stuff, and the political state, right? This political state is intentional as a force, a quote unquote, a violence, but civil society is just people just doing stuff in here, right? The organization of how people conform to their labor and their thought, their mode of thought is a civil society, how people can be act civilized and such. But a political state exists within it as a controlling entity, right? How civil society or how society should be civilized through the political state. So you can have a civil society but no state, but you can have a political state and civil society together, but you can't have a political state by itself. There will be no society with, because it's like politics as a political state has a society. It's like connected. It's like, I use the example of the Black Panther Party being distinguished when capitalism and U.S. hegemonic thought is also distinguished, right? You would not need a particular Black Panther Party or a mobilization force against a system that doesn't exist. It would too wash and wither away. So with the thing that it is fighting against. So civil society can have it with or without a state. Political state, you need to have a society, but you can't have, you can't have it by itself. All intention and act. There's no reason distinguishing self-defense and violence. Same thing as saying sex from rape. Yeah, there is a distinction.
I had a discussion with someone once, and actually my wife, about MMA and boxing and my kids and play fighting. And when we consent to engagements, they are defined as one thing. Like if I give my homeboy $5 he asked me for, it's not theft because he consented to it. When you go to engage in the Congress with someone, the difference between I do censor myself, not just because of TikTok, because these are inflammatory, triggering words. When you do engage with Congress with someone who doesn't want you to, what differentiates that from good old fashioned sex is the fact that you didn't get consent. When you look at MMA uses aggression, it uses physical exertion, but the fact that no one's rights are being violated through the course of these actions, it's why it's defined as such. And my whole thing, I know people think I be playing a semantics game, but it's like, why even have words or use them if we're going to ignore the very relevant and specific reasons why they are termed as such? The word violence isn't the word violence because some guy just decided to throw a couple letters together and call it a day. It's an extension of the word violate. And that's why when you go to court, you don't plead anti-violence or opposite violence. You plead self-defense because they're not the same thing. Even in a court of law by the system we still already use. So it's weird that it gets convenient that we will go into a court of law knowing that violence isn't self-defense and self-defense isn't violence. But then when it comes to like these conversations and when we apply it to society, it gets all murky and obfuscated for some reason.
In name only, I like to say the liberal system operates. In name only, which then does conflate all terms together. The words don't mean anything to a liberal system. I dropped the term communist. People call themselves communists, they're not. Just like how you dropped the word anarchist turned to, what was it? What was the term you used? I love that term. But you drop these terms.
I just said I'm a human being who subscribes to anarchy and subscribes to abolitionism. But like at root, just a human being.
Yeah, we're all humans. All ideologies stem from the person that thinks that thought. So labels have nothing but no meaning inside of a liberal system in which we do live in. So arguing the semantics and liberals, the terms and such, it in some way, shape, or form kind of validates the system when we're talking about these terms in such the ways. But it's important to understand the distinction that is made, to understand how people get to that end of the road, how get to those conclusions, so that we can reverse engineer that reasoning to help people understand why they think that way. Because most people find one path into one mode of thought and then think, oh, this is life. This is how it's supposed to be. But then we can reverse engineer that mode of thought to be like, well, you think like that because of X, Y, and Z, such conditions and such. But yeah, the liberals in the society conflate terms left and right. So it's like holding on to, certain words, these certain things together kind of lose meaning unless you want to actually get into specific terms, right? I'll use the word dialectic. Not a lot of people know what that term means and how it functions. So I feel comfortable using the term dialectic as opposed to communist and communism. But as a dialectic, right, which founds that ideology, it's easier to express myself as that mode of thought, the individual. So it's harder for liberals to conflate what they don't understand. And I'm quite thankful that liberals do not understand dialectical materialism, or at least it's mode of thought, right? We are all human beings, yes, but liberals can conflate that meaning too, as well as humans, right? Pacifying genocide, they can make you human because they say so and such. Go, P. I can't see your full name, sorry. Don't worry, we don't do too much steamrolling around here. I only steamroll a liberal when they're getting all hussy fussy. But I don't do too much steamrolling around here. I like to help. I like to listen, yap, talk. Can we be yapping for real? An entire yap session. People can have regrets. That's the thing that people have. I try not to live with regrets. If I say something, damn, it came out of my mouth. I must have said it. And that must be that I subscribe to it. So I choose carefully what I say and what try not. But majority of the time, it just goes out. I'm like, well, I said that. Damn, I must have did. Damn. Which is why I don't mind getting clipped, but but if it happens, put in context at least. I don't want to be pointed out. It's because I say a lot of stuff. I say so much stuff. Like if it's out of context, it just looks bad. Because I do be talking about sensitive topics earnestly, but of course it goes into an overarching, understanding of our discussion. But then clips inside of that conversation just paints me as like this bigot. It's incredible. Oh, for real. But I think that is malicious. It's intentional. It's the intent. But the intent is a layer which helps us pacify this understanding. So the malicious intent of violence, right? No Wayne. There is no malicious intent itself. And that's how we define these terms, right? Through this intent, at the very least, more so malicious intent. But it's on the intent. It's all the saying that I do. But be careful, because liberalism in name only, right? They intend to do this, or intend to do, but they do another thing, right? It's like Democrats, like human rights and such. Okay, 50 billion to Israel. Why in name only do these people actually go out and try to rectify their actions, but through humanity? But liberalism in name only does any of these things actually have a meaning? It's actually do anything for us in the liberal society, right? That's where we get into the nitty gritty. That's why political education is a paramount. Just at least have an understanding, right? I don't know, some people here already have that great level of understanding. That's why we have these, so that we can have these conversations to help nurture that mode of thought for our people, right? The people who are wishy-washy, on the fence, or not unsure, have confidence and be sure that there is a theoretical framework for your their thought that'll help you understand it, whether you need it or not, right? If you don't need it, you're already on the right track, if you are committing to those actions that reproduce community. But if you do need it, we have it right here, right? This mode of thought, this how do I look at life, right? Some people need training wheels, and then eventually those training wheels come off, which is a beautiful thing. Dialectical materialism are those training wheels for people who don't want to get knee deep into theory, but then still find the importance of understanding literature, being literate in media, and all of our phenomena, all of our aspects of society.
All right, so I'm unmuted now. First, I just want to disclose that I'm a Maoist. Okay, so I'm not like, you know, against any of the things, but like I feel like any of the things you say. But what I think is that like for instance, I feel like condemning liberalism outright. I don't think that that's like a good discussion. I feel like we should be focusing on how Marx came into like contradiction with Adam Smith, and that's like what gave rise to that. Not because like they thought that they were incorrect at the time.
Right on.
Am I making myself clear, or like do you want me to like explain?
Oh no, you're clear. I just thought you had more to say.
I think so. I think sorry, jump in. I think from my own personal perspective, Deluxe, I completely understand what you're saying, and I think having internal conversations about it with people that do understand that these are all theoretical conversations that we are having, and that based on our own individual experiences, we may have, we see our realities differently. However, because of carried generational trauma, which is something that is that changes our DNA, right, from the womb, this is something that is being taught very, even just, it's something that's growing in terms of literature, especially in like the last 5 years. There are certain things and certain words that trigger people and regardless of how they may logically feel about it or logically know about it, it does not diminish the trigger response. Some of those words are, say, even liberalism itself, communism, Marxism, right? And
Yeah.
and the reason why I bring that up is because I was actually having this discussion yesterday with a friend of mine. I'm half Cuban, half El Salvadorian, and I realized yesterday how much generational trauma was affecting me, despite all of the literature that I've read, and despite what it is that I feel is truth. But regardless, sometimes generational trauma can be triggered by certain words. So I definitely agree. I agree with both of your points, and I think it just depends on the audience and understanding your audience when speaking.
I'm gonna come.
Yeah, I definitely agree to that. Because, like, I do agree, like, with 90% of the things that you guys are saying, it's just that, I feel like by discrediting, like, obviously we should try to discredit liberalism because it created a very oppressive system that we're currently contended with today through the form of neoliberalism, right? But, I feel like the thing that most people get hung up on isn't the fact that um, liberalism didn't work, right? I feel like communists as a whole have more to prove about their um, system, just by the way how history played out in the 1990s than you know liberals do, and I think that that's the more unfortunate aspect of this.
Another thing that I've been thinking about too is that like because liberalism technically like isn't prevalent right now, but there are a lot of people that like really want to be liberals for some reason. Like they just really want to be liberals. Like you can't argue with them about it. Like we were talking about, they hear communism or socialism and they like lose it. I have this wild idea that after I met this like other anarchist that what like I consider myself to be an anarcho-indigenist, so I believe that like we need to reconnect to pre-imperial ways of being and come to a like fusion of that pre-industrial or pre-imperial like understanding of life to like where we are now. Um, but like a big thing that I consider is like what if we tried to convince liberals to actually be liberals? Like what if we met liberals and then argued with them about liberalism to convince them to actually do the liberalism so that then there might be effective like middle ground that we can then turn into the actual right, and then anarchy can become the American left, and then we can only have communism as Americans like Overton window. Thoughts on that?
I like that perspective a lot, actually. I think that sorry, brain fart.
Okay, yeah, I do actually think that like it's like trying to convince Christians to be Christian is actually might be similar. Because I was actually thinking about that the other day too, where like if you think about how Christianity socially functioned prior to the Enlightenment era, which like technically the Enlightenment like made liberalism, quote unquote, the like global norm. And like in the place of Christianity, you effectively got like empire spreading liberalism as a means of control instead of spreading Christianity as a means of control. And it's like Christianity was concurrent to liberalism, but then due to how like liberalism impacted the relationship that church and state had, you then got like this wild, crazy replacement for Christianity known as liberal politics. So like I think that's like a probably a big part of, yeah, I now agree with that the more I think about
Yeah.
it.
That kind of like reminds me of like you know, um, I was like hearing a discussion the other day about how how the Renaissance happened and like how the Christian humanists kind of like changed the perspective of being a Christian. They thought that the world was just like a craven passage into like a better world in the afterlife, right? And then the Industrial Revolution happened, and then everyone thought, God gave us the world because w- we were like, God's children, and for that reason, He gave us the world because He loved us so much, right? And that's like how they reconstituted that, right? And then it became like a whole other history about um, how Jesus Himself said that He was going to like free everyone from debt peonage, cancel all the debts, and free everyone from from being a servant to unaccountable authority, right? And that's like why Christianity kind of progressed to be such a powerful force. And even like during the 20th century, they both like opposed and went against Nazis and communists at the same time. And it's always been like a very sparse, diverse institution that has kind of had like schizophrenia. like even during the Sandinista regime, like the lower clergy and the higher clergy fought because they couldn't decide on who should be reigning supreme, right? And eventually the Sandinistas won, and they had like all of this military encirclement, and it became this whole mess, right? Um, Also, same thing about Adam Smith. That's why I was like I don't know. I think that the point why so many people focus on Adam Smith so much is that I think that he truly tried to articulate at the first time how we were going to rid society of feudal rent sinking, right? But like I feel like now we've like reverted back to that old form, freedom to rent seek, that we could continue cutting up profit margins, dividing the world as we like, and suck out more resources. But I don't think that Adam Smith had the kind of like foresight to see that. Like I don't think that even our founding fathers had the foresight to see that, the United States would become like this horrible thing that would just collapse and take everything and commodify it and create a massive national security state with 3,000 arms and like the Congress for cultural freedom and all of that.
Well, I don't know. Like to me, I view the formation and like maintenance of the United States to be a very overt example of like bourgeoisie dominance, because like over the entire like the founding of the country was basically the wealthy utilizing social tensions to spark a revolution that allowed them to then take control of the reins of the society that was like growing at the time, and to then maintain a system of governance that ensured the general public who did not have access to democracy or governance or truly the economy. And instead, it was reserved for the already existent aristocracy that arose at the onset of, you know, the pre like Revolutionary War era. And then, you
Yeah,
see the Civil War happen, which was technically a time that, a lot of people pushed against the racial capitalist system. And there was effective, like, use of what you call it? Um, like, there was actually going to be a shift where the state would be used to actually benefit everyone equally, and it would not, like, continue to be the racially segregated apartheid state that it had been. And then the bourgeoisie swooped back in and completely destroyed the Reconstruction era post the Civil War. And they reinstituted a like racial capitalist system that they maintained until it nearly fell apart again during the like Second World War. And like technically FDR was like probably relatively similar to like Churchill in being a like closeted fascist, I would argue, like a social democrat with like very heavy like authoritarian leanings. Also, fun fact, the Roosevelt family fucking stole and prevented my family from accessing water as like a group of poor farmers in the Dakotas and Minnesota. So they fucking like destroyed that, and then the Roosevelt family went on to go politically destroy the country. But like, yeah, I think like the biggest issue is that like the U.S. hasn't really functionally ever had a moment where it ever worked for people and wasn't just a like means by which for the aristocracy to benefit themselves.
yeah. I think that the unique part about the bourgeois revolutions, or like I guess most revolutions in general, is that um, like the French Revolution and all of that. Most of the bourgeoisie tends to be generally divided about lots of different things. Like we have like a lot of conflicts between like Walmart and Amazon because like Walmart is trying to take away the monopoly of like Amazon that it has over like online shopping and warehouse centers and all of that stuff, and they're trying to define Amazon by like taking up all of that market value, right? And so like they do have there's this book that I forgot what it was called, but it mentions about how like as more states become more decentralized, it becomes harder for them to be imposed internally and opposed internally, and because everyone's left confused about how power generally operates, right? Like for instance, we could obviously see that like the national security state is like the thing that's like kind of holding the glue together to like be oppressive for the capitalist class. But no one really has like the, I guess, the consciousness to like try to like triangulate and cut that off, because like there's just so many like capitalist people that are like funding NGOs and think tanks and so many different things, like the Congress of Cultural Freedom, you know. Some people are like outright funded by the CIA because they have less leftist tendencies, and they would rather have those leftist tendencies be vacuumed up into academia than letting, you know, a real working class movement like actually get any traction, you know. And like it's like piranhas now, like the whole NGO world, they just like try to suck up all of the funding. If tomorrow Jeff Bezos asked wanted to set up a think tank and gave it $1 billion, they would just go in a feeding frenzy because they want that money. They're so desperate for it. So I think that in that respect we are ideologically outmatched. But um, oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. I'm sorry, you guys.
I have those brain farts too all the time. Just think about it, get into it. Yapping, that's what we do
Yeah.
over here. Like yap a lot. And it yaps so much it loses our train of thought. But I was saying, which is all great. But the point we made about liberalism today was actually a reaction. I had another agenda today, which is now gonna be pushed next week. But we do talk about the Marxism and appreciation of labor and stuff. It just so happened today that we're critiquing liberalism, a fan favorite topic around here. But in our critiques of liberalism, we are saying one thing, critique against liberalism, and saying another, the promotion of another mode of thought, right? Whether it be Marxism, communism, or just the antithesis of the liberal ideology. But yeah, we stumbled upon liberalism here, just so happened to be. But then, normally, quote unquote, we do talk about our, Marxist discussions, our dialectic discussions, our economic discussions outside of the realms of ideology, where you like keep our discussions rooted materially. But it just happened today, how to be liberalism. Great discussion, though.
Yeah, I never appreciate it. I really like it. I was initially scared, like, that this strike workers thing is gonna be like some other ideology, like I don't know, like neoconservatism, or like I don't know, just like some of the like more pragmatic ones. But I'm glad that this is at least like socialist or broadly socialist.
Pretty much broadly socialist, left leaning. I would put the very like most general term left leaning, because then you start anti-capitalist, and that's pretty much where everyone's at. Where you go all the way left to anarchy, sit comfortable, in the middle of communism or socialism, but it is left leaning. So yeah, socialism at large, and then you have people all the way left who are down the system, burn the system, anarchy, raw. To the people who are like, well, we can organize with the system, but not as a social democrat, tearing down the system. You get a lot of different ideologies here, which is great for nurturing discussion and such, right? We have these right-wing think tanks and such that commit to their silly ideologies. But then, wouldn't it be nice to have not like a Joe Rogan to the left? We don't need that. I don't know. No one say we need Joe Rogan to the left, but we have these nurtured discussions about all forms of the, ideological spectrum here on the left. Glad to be here with you guys.
All right. I finally regained my brain fart, so I'm just gonna like pick up from there, because I don't know. Um, so I, it's also like a discussion that I had with like evolving seeds like a while ago, about how like it's such a difficult time for us to organize as, like, as to like enforce our own type of system, I guess. Because like, even like during the 70s, when we had like, like a lot of like brand new deal reforms and all of these different things that were kind of like at least putting like some clamps onto society, right? And which is kind of even more dystopian, because now like they could use the fact that like we have like a lot of ethnic divisions in order to like tighten the screws on specific people, and you know all of that. It's just very dystopian. And even with all of this thing where there was like a second world with like, hampering capital mobility, that there was, um, a third world that was trying to set up developmentalist policies and trying to do that. And like, that unions were the highest percentage of the workforce. And we've had like, in all this time, even through all of that, unions still managed to get defeated by billionaires because of how much capital mobility had increased since the 50s and the 70s. And I think that's probably the most dystopian part about all of this. That not only were billionaires able to beat us, even when we had the strongest time in the labor movement, that we were like completely left defeated by Thatcher and Reagan. That not only that, but it kind of like sublated the all of the since like the only thing that really has institutional power and influence now is the democratic institutions and the Republican Party, I guess, in some way. Um, it has just kind of suppressed the ideological leanings of the both the far right and the far left, right? And it's kind of just created like this parody like fascism where like it's just like gutting labor, gutting all of these resources, and letting like massive multinational corporations cut off more and more and more, and it's just very depressing.
Boo, yeah, boo, bad corporations, boo. We don't like corporations around here. Who said corporations
Oh
are evil?
God.
Boo. And people, the
But I
bootlickers too, people who defend it, boo.
Ooh.
also like I know that things are depressing and scary in the context of like how dark everything is getting right now, but like realistically all of our ancestors, regardless of like our backgrounds, have been dealing with this to some extent for like some period of time. Like for all of us to currently be here on this call, like all of our ancestors were put through shit. I mean, like white people were literally used by the government as fodder to steal land from people. Like regular old people were literally used as weapons in order to help the state get land. Like, at the end of the day, like no one in this system has been given adequate access to what they need in order to actually govern themselves. But like we can all do like any amount of stuff we can to progress the like overall movement of human liberation, because like every little thing we do helps add more cracks to the system. And at the end of the day, like it only takes so much before things finally start shifting in a direction. I mean, shit, even the Republican Party right now is actually using like relatively like left-leaning messaging in the midst of all of their like overt fascist stuff, which is logical given that they're national socialists. But like I think there's like a lot that we can be excited about and hopeful for still, because we are still adding to the movement of human liberation, and it is a long haul process that we were all part of.
What's your opinion on like communist experiments from the past then?
Well, like the
Like,
USSR, Cuba, Vietnam.
Yeah, all of them.
They're experiments. We have to understand that the conditions they were before and then after made drastic changes and improvement to the conditions they existed in. So for the experiments failures, one could say that they did not succeed in maintaining, but because of external and internal factors, right? Can't just blame it just to blame it because it didn't work, because it didn't work, right? Socialist experiments, communist experiments did their thing, just as capitalism does, but it just so happened that capitalism had more allies, more capital, more interest because of indoctrination that allowed for these social experiments to go hindered through their development. So socialism as a developing phenomena for our past, USSR, Cuban and Vietnamese and other socialist experiments were hindered in their processes, whereas capitalism more or less went unhindered in its development, in the 16, 17, 1800s, in which it developed into imperialism 19 in the 21st century, 1900s, So, there's a massive force which when these socialist experiments materialized had to combat against during the development of their socialist experiments. So should socialism go unhindered in development, these experiments would have turned out much different. But because the fact that we had these imperialist powers imposing their great freedom onto these experiments, that we do see these, results. So Do they work? From the material conditions of the past, of the peasants and the serfs of that time under Tsarist Russia and of authoritarian monarchy rule, into a more or less so republican or a socialist society, there have been great advancements. Life expectancy rate went up for most of these countries, reading literacy rates went up for most of these countries, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of these metrics, but this is where the polarization comes in the 60s and 70s, and where these experiments were waning and dying out. The critiques came. It was like they didn't do it as great as the capitalists, as our great country, because the country veils over exploitation and takes what isn't theirs, aka the achievements of humanity, right? Capitalism does not make the achievement. It's people that make the achievement. It's capitalism takes that, right? And then, of course, uses that oppression to diminish any other alternative that could threaten the powers of capital. So the socialist experiments, I would say, worked great. They did, to show us how to organize utilizing capital in the intentional and organizational ways that we have seen. Socialist experiments failed because of factors, but we must look and turn towards these experiments to understand how, just like how Marx and Engels analyzed the Paris Commune. Right, they looked at what worked, criticized the way they did, but understand how they did it to then formulate, after analyzing it, a quote unquote better mode of production, which then synthesized into what became into communism.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
comrade. And just to piggyback off of that, that's just what we're doing here. We're experimenting and we're continuing to develop new foundations to meet our current conditions, our material needs of today. But we have the opportunity here to create something new, to create all of our ideas, whether it's communism, intercommunalism, socialism, humanism, collectivism, egalitarianism, so many options that warriors, freedom fighters, revolutionaries of the past have given us. We have the opportunity to co-create something new. I wouldn't say we're trying to create a utopia, but we know and we're fully conscious that we can do better than what we're doing now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree on both your ends. And I think just one major point, just to add to that discussion about, whether these experiments were failure. One of the biggest things that capitalism has done, and I'm sure, most if not all already know this, is the exploitation that capitalism has done on these communities, specifically when it comes to mono agriculture. And especially when it comes to smaller regions, like, for example, as just because I know them best, Cuba and El Salvador, these areas, when they've already started to form, the to go towards the revolution, and let's say to go and start committing to the FMLA, at that point, mono agriculture had already been in full swing and completely decimated the resources in the area, which further increased the difficulties in growing the desired socialist systems that they would want, because there simply were no resources, as capitalism had already taken them. Yeah.
Also, like, given the circumstances, I would argue that Cuba is currently doing like a really fucking good job, because like, all things considered, like, their healthcare is through the roof for the most part. They have some of the most advanced medical science in the world right now. Their like fooding, or their like programs for providing food, have been pretty successful. Housing has been successful, like, as far as I can tell, and their education systems too. So like, there's a lot about like, and yeah, I mean, like has already been said, like, so much about these experiments has actually done so much good. It's just like, at the end of the day, the conditions of other imperial states did not allow them to like functionally be maintained as like independent projects. But like, also, there's a lot to say about like the individuals involved with like running the experiments, that other people might have been better suited to in certain contexts compared to others. But yeah, and also like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that when it comes to Cuba, at least how it stands, as of this year, last year, the conditions have deteriorated immensely. But of course, a lot of that has to do with external factors, and unfortunately, a lot of brain drain. Not necessarily through the fault of the government, but in some cases, yes, in fault of the government. And I definitely think that there is there's nuance there, and there's gray area there. And I definitely think that, just like, with all these experiments, there is that gray area, and it's never going to be, as I think someone mentioned, utopia. It's impossible. But what we do have now that wasn't done before is access to information, and access to being able to do things that weren't even considered before, like, such as like hydroponics and things like that, where maybe the region in which one lives is not exactly what would be desired in terms of arable farmland, but there's still a way to you know move on from it. So I do think that the change in technology, the access to information, does change things. But I think, yeah, there's nuance there when it comes to those to the experiments, and there's good that has come from it, but we can't just clearly outright say that yes, they're doing great by standards. But that's just of course my personal opinion. And in terms of that, like, definitely we can agree to disagree on that. And as I mentioned, I think these are good discussions to have, just because it allows us to learn from the perspective of others, and how is it that they see it versus oneself.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for like offering up that information in response to like my statements too. So yeah, thank you. I was also wondering really quick if anyone had heard of like Rojava in like the autonomous region of northeastern Syria.
No.
So this is
No.
actually like an anarchist experiment, technically speaking. Yeah, awesome, Sprig. But like it is actually an extremely complex situation, because it's like led by Kurdish forces, which is like a disenfranchised people that are like spread out across like what is currently a bunch of different countries, including Syria, Turkey, Armenia. And they led an insurgent movement that like liberated part of Syria during the Syrian civil war back in like 2010, 2011. And they were then able to get US military support, which is like, questionable choices were made there, to maintain that as part of the like war on ISIS at the time. And for a while, US military was like helping Rojava with their military to hold off ISIS. And in that time, the like forces of Rojava were instantiating what is called democratic confederalism, which is an extension on theories from like this guy named Murray Bookchin, who wrote theories called libertarian municipalism and social ecology, where he kind of tried to do anarchy plus all of the like discoveries of the 20th century, basically, with environmentalism and feminism and like municipalities being the basis of how people organized together. And so they're all like really cool theories that are being practiced in Rojava right now, where they have like independent farms and independent like municipalities that are running all of the things that they need. There's like full self-representative democracies that are established like across the area. They adhere mostly to like indigenous practices that allow for like a lot of indigenous communities that were liberated in this period, also under rule from Syria. Like are allowed to do their thing. And it's a very like interesting philosophical framework that I think is like really cool. But yeah, they have like pretty successfully managed to hold a like non-state state in Rojava, but they're also constantly getting bombed by Turkey, and now the US is not supporting them anymore. and now there's a lot of like issues with them maintaining things as their like civil infrastructure is getting like bombed by Turkey consistently, which is being given aid by the US government, who is also still sending arms to the people of Rojava. So like the US is playing both sides to specifically ensure destabilization, presumably to like then later manufacture consent to invade and then use Rojava for its oil resources. But yeah, sorry on that little tangent. I was just talking about like experiments of like communism, and that made me think of that like really neat, well, not neat, but like really interesting thing going on there. So I was actually working on a like album to try to do a fundraiser for them as well. That I'll
Have you read The Divide?
what?
There's this book. I think that this is the thing that like really like made me more radical, I guess. It was a book called The Divide by Jason Hickel. I think that giving that to a social democrat is like really good because it just like talks about like kind of the reason why liberalism is kind of so problematic and why like free markets exactly don't yield like the best possible outcome for most parties. And I thought that it was like very good at articulating why that was.
Can you drop that in the
Because
chat,
like, have you
please?
guys read about like the IMF and the World Bank?
Which part?
Like like the structural adjustment programs.
I've like heard of them, but I think if you're like if it feels like the space for us to elaborate, like that sounds like kind of interesting.
No, it's just like basically right. Most of the objectives of the World Bank is like um actually, I think that IMF is for preventing capital controls for most countries, and the World Bank is for giving international development loans, you know, offered in like, you know, U.S. currency and things like that. And the point of the World Bank is like to make sure that people get take out loans in hard currencies, quote unquote, right? Like the U.S. dollar, right? And the purpose of the IMF is that once these economies go into like um, since they don't have like, you know, hard currency, they're forced to like completely liberalize their domains, privatize their like resources and things like that, and you know, slowly but surely like whittle around the state a little more by more. Like this is what happened like after the 70s when uh the unit the European Union stopped getting like a ton of like these great aid disbursements, and they started being subjected increasingly more to shock therapy after you know, the Soviet Union stopped being perceived as a great threat, right? And you know, slowly but surely, like it's still getting whittled down and whittled down and whittled down. Like what happened with Greece with Syriza recently, like they completely gutted their all of their you know, municipalities, hospitals, all of these different things in the name of like restructuring the economy for free trade and all of these things. The point of Syriza was actually to get elected to try to challenge these things, but the only thing that the Greek finance minister could do was sell off the ECB bonds that they had to like kind of stave off the economic problems because like the banks were obviously going to do a bank run because they wanted to kind of hold the economy hostage. It's like very fascinating. There's this memoir by Yanis Varoufakis. He was like Greece finance minister. He has like some like social democratic leanings, but like I really like his perspective because it like is very enlightening about his discussion about the ECB, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. And I thought that his analysis was really good. Yeah.
I think yours was pretty superb just now too.
Yeah. On Skibbity.
Skibbity toilet. Oh my god, it was scared me like that. I thought it was a mistypo. I thought it was Jackson Hinkle, the grifter. I was like, no, but then it's Jason Hickle.
I literally get them confused
Yeah.
all the time.
I got scared for a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah, Yeah, and I also like really like the analysis of this other guy called Michael Hudson. He's like I guess like semi Trotskyist. He's like I don't know. I really liked his analysis on American imperialism in the 20th century though. But like he has like a different understanding of Marxism, which I don't know if I like fully subscribe to that, but I'm like, you know what? I at least like appreciate kind of his beliefs, you know? Yeah, sorry if like I flooded you guys with like a lot of information, but yeah.
That's the point of these, to yap and flood information, to talk, express, feel out, you know? This is the point. Yeah, you are fulfilling out the entire point of this discussion. Thanks, comrade.
For sure.
Oh my god, we yapped is twice as long. Guys, yapped as long as me. So 5 minutes till 6, going for 2 hours strong. If you need to get out of here, get out of here. But if you're here to stay, stay. I'm going to do a hard stop at 5 or 6. Give it 5 minutes. But if you want to stay here, please stay and yap and talk. I have commitments. But 5 minutes till we can talk about some other stuff and yap. But I love the discussion. This was great. A lot of expression and stuff, and listening, more importantly, of course, because we're not here to bash, banter, and argue, right? We had some disagreements, talked them out, ironed them, and that's exactly what we need to have in our spaces. The ability to express and discuss here what we need to make ourselves feel comfortable and understanding, right? Because this is a safe space. We are allowed to have such discussions, right? In others, in not so safe spaces, these discussions are superfluous, right? There are more immediate ends at which we need to regard ourselves in other spaces. But here, we are allowed this luxury in space and time to express ourselves as such. So love the conversations going on here.
Oh yeah, and let me actually put the link of like super imperialism because it also talks about like the agrarian problem with regards for like because like what another objective of the United States is trying to make sure that all of the property that belongs to um, the farmers, they mostly get like outcompeted by American goods because the United States just like gluts the market with their um, resources, right? And so this is causing a lot of these people to go over to the shanty towns, and you know since there's more people working in the shanty towns, the wages become depressed, and you know since um, the fact that they're like farming and stuff is like the one thing that they have over of leverage over the developed world. They can't really like do that much politically in order to like challenge all of this. So yeah, it's just a very unfortunate thing.
Yes, good night. See you all next week. Get some sleep, get some rest. We need you. We need everyone top physical form and shape mentally as well. So this will conclude this session. I'll leave right now. Hard stop, close to 2 hours after. Thank you so much for joining. If you've joined, stayed this long, love you all. Glad that you're here. Be back next week because we are here next week talking about other things. Maybe other things if the other things I plan get moved again because other things happen. But that's the game of life, isn't it? We're still here talking about stuff. Nothing's changed about that. The topics of which kind of a floating idea, but the fact that we're here does matter. So thanks, every single one of you. Enjoy the rest of your night. Enjoy the rest of your week, the rest of your life. Oh god, that's what I'm saying. More productive in a congressional session. That's what I'm saying. So of course, YouTube Fridays this year, every Wednesdays. Catch these, not hands. These thoughts. Love you all. Wah wah wah.